Welcome back everybody to section 3. Here we talk about the driving mechanisms behind plate tectonics. So first, what even is plate tectonics? Well, the idea here is that the surface of the Earth is divided into these pieces called plates, and that the geologic activity at the surface of the Earth, things like earthquakes or volcanoes, way that continents move, what shape they are, all of this can be explained by the interactions and the movements of these plates. And it's important to note before we get any further, plates are not the same as crust. These are made of lithosphere, made of crust and the upper rigid part of the mantle. So we've talked about all this evidence that the plates are moving around, that the surface of the Earth, the continents are all in motion. But this begs the question of how and why these plates move. Well, the answer to how and why the plates move all has to do with convection, mantle convection. So what is this convection process? Well, you might think of a lava lamp. So there's a heat source which is at the bottom, but heat rises. So all the material here at the bottom gets all this heat and then slowly rises up because it's warm. And once it gets to the top, it's far away from the heat source at the bottom. It starts to cool down and then come back down. It gets heated again at the very bottom, and the cycle repeats. So we have this constantly circulating cell of material here, warming at the bottom and then cooling off at the top and then coming back down. And here's another example. So we have a pot of boiling water. The heat source is at the bottom. It heats the water, which rises and comes to the top. There, the water is far away from the heat source. It cools off, moves towards the outer edges, and then comes back down where it gets heated again. And if we had to put this in formal terms, as few words as possible, convection is a form of heat transfer in a fluid medium, fluid like water, or it could be fluid like the mantle, the asthenospheric mantle of the Earth. Form of heat transfer in a fluid by the circulation of currents from one region to another. And now what does this look like in the Earth? Well, here's one diagram that I think does a good job with this. We have these big convecting cells in the mantle. And in places where the warm material rises up, these are our mid-ocean ridges, where we have the creation of new oceanic crust. In these other places where the material is old and cold and starts to move down, these are going to be our trenches, where old oceanic material gets recycled. This picture here has the entire mantle circulating with one big cell. Keep in mind, sometimes you will see other photos, pictures, where you have the top circulating and the bottom circulating. Just know that this is not completely settled. So we've assumed with all of this that the core of the Earth, the inner deep parts of the Earth, are hot, and that's part of what drives the mantle convection. But then it begs the question, well, why is it hot? Especially compared to a planet like Mars, where the interior, the core, is cold. Why is the Earth so hot? So there are three main sources for Earth's heat. The first is from when the planet was originally forming through accretion. You have all these collisions between different bodies, and they heat each other up as a result. The second is from friction. As Earth is differentiating, dense material is sinking to the core, lighter things are moving towards the surface, and there's all this friction involved with that process that produces a lot of heat. And final step, important one, is heat from the decay of radioactive elements, especially in the Earth's crust. This is actually a very significant source of heat for the planet. So we might put it all together here. We have these convecting cells in the mantle. We have hot material, which is rising from the hot core of the Earth. Here, at the mid-ocean ridge, we have this hot material exposed to the surface as new oceanic crust is created. And here, where the oceans meet the continents, that old material is recycled back into the Earth. You can think of this sort of like a conveyor belt. So it rises up here, it moves all the material along, pushing and pulling continents, driving plate motion and the motion of continents on the surface. And then over here, the cold rock sinks, and we go through the cycle of convection again. So one more time, let's put it all together. Earth's surface is made of rigid plates that move around over time. Plate tectonics is the grand unifying theory that explains how these plates move and what the consequences are of their interactions with each other. Plate tectonics explains all other large-scale geological observations, It is the grand unifying theory of geology. Everything from earthquakes to volcanoes to the very existence of oceans and continents can all be related back to this larger framework of plate tectonics. It was developed from the 1950s through the 1970s based on earlier ideas from Alfred Wegener, proposed in about 1912, so a full 50 years from being proposed to finally being developed and accepted. Wegener did not have a full explanation for how and why the continents move, but this is something that has been established now. Convection in the mantle is primarily what drives plate tectonics. The core of the Earth is very hot, so material near it comes up. As the material comes up, it cools, moves outwards, and then later comes back down, part of the conveyor belt motion which drives plate motion. There are two main aspects of this plate motion. We'll talk about the ridge push, as the oceans are spreading apart at the mid-ocean ridges, and we'll talk about slab pull at the trenches as the old cold crust is pulled back into the Earth on the downward part of the conveyor belt. Stick around for the next section. We talk about plate boundaries.